Hello, everyone. So after two great presentations on music and fine arts, I'm going to talk about creativity. I think it's appropriate. LLMs, diffusion models, all of these new technologies brought a lot of attention on AI and creativity. So, for example, last month, NaNoWriMo actually faced a big criticism just because they did not refuse to get AI-generated novels. So let's start from the beginning. Is creativity a new topic in AI? So let's put hands in the air. If you think it was the first time that someone talked about music composed by machines was before, let's say, 2010. Who thinks that it was before 2010? Hands in the air. I suppose most of people think. Okay? Before 2000. Okay, before we land on the moon. Okay, fewer. Before the Second World War. Okay, before the 1900s. There's one left. Yes, so let's go. Yeah, it dates back to the 800s. You're right. Yes, Ada Lovelace. Well, she was actually making some notes on mechanical mechanism to analytical engine, and she said that, or she wrote that if we could, in a way, represent the frequencies of music in a good representation, this mechanical machine would be able to compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent. So even back then, she was thinking of what Ziv just presented. So this is very interesting. 100 years later, a group of researchers decide to just join for a couple of days and solve what they decide to call artificial intelligence. Yeah, it was just like a workshop, and we're going to solve it. We're going to solve it. And they had like a really good work plan, which included neurons, self-improving machines, and there's one interesting part there that was the seventh point on the work plan was regarding creativity and randomness. So this was a decade just after creating the first digital machines. And they posed a conjecture, a fairly attractive conjecture. The difference between creative thinking and unimaginative competence thinking lies in the injection of randomness. So this idea that creativity is just competent thinking plus randomness. LLMs represent this idea very well, up to a point that the temperature parameter is most of the times advertised as the creative parameter. So this conjecture still holds nowadays. But how can we actually check this conjecture? It's just a conjecture, it's an assumption. Can we actually say if this is true? So we need to ask, what is creativity? And this is the hard part. This is the part that I always avoid, and I'm going to do it again. So it is complex. It's really hard to find a good definition for creativity, and it might sound foolish to discuss something that we cannot define, right? Yet we are here talking about artificial intelligence, a whole conference dedicated to artificial intelligence, and I doubt that if we try to get one single definition out of everyone in this room for intelligence, we would have a hard time. So there must be another way, and actually is what just Gonçalo and Ricardo presented is basically the problem-solving approach. So we stop trying to define it, we leave that for later, we just start building stuff. We just try to solve problems. We acknowledge that we're not going to make it, and we just pick some problems that we think might need creativity, for example, in this case, or intelligence, to solve. For example, in creativity tasks, we talk about humor writing, music composition, visual arts, and even research. For example, mathematical conjectures, or drug discovery. So all these tasks are interesting for creativity and supposedly need creativity to be solved. After this, we start just implementing stuff, and we criticize the progress, usually from other researchers, not our own, which is the best way to criticize. And we advance like that. We just say, oh, that thing doesn't do this, and this is part of creative. And then we do this a lot of times. We just iterate and iterate. And this is how AI has developed, right, up to this point. And it's been working fairly well. People now talk about artificial general intelligence. And the question is if this approach will take us there. Well, actually, this kind of approach for creativity started, well, there were a lot of workshops starting from 1999 on these tasks. And this series of workshops culminated in the International Conference for Computational Creativity in 2009, which took place in Lisbon. Yes, it's true. The first International Conference for Computational Creativity was in Lisbon. But what is computational creativity then? Well, first thing is cool. So it's hard to define it from being hard also to define creativity. It's also hard to define computational creativity in the same way as artificial intelligence. But Association for Computational Creativity provides this definition. It's a multidisciplinary endeavor with the goal of modeling, simulating, or replicating creativity using a computer to achieve one or more of these ends. First, understanding human creativity. Second, build creative machines. Third, build creativity aiding tools. So all of these are part of computational creativity. You might be thinking, then how is this different from creative AI or Gen AI? And I have, a viewpoint. I don't have the answer, I have a viewpoint. Creative AI, it sounds like is AI that is creative, but it's much more about applying machine learning techniques to problems in the artistic domain. For example, soundtrack composition and painting style classification would be tasks for creative AI. Generative AI is more, or it sounds like is AI that can generate anything, but it's more about practicing or predicting complex, highly dimensional artifacts using mostly deep learning techniques. So usually soundtrack composition and drug discovery using deep learning, because it's the best way to approach this kind of tasks, usually are considered inside of generative AI. But there are other tasks in computational creativity that are not considered in any of these. It can be because it's more about discriminating, such as humor detection, and it's not really creativity or a creative domain, so easily identifiable as a creative domain, such as conjecture generation, mathematical conjecture generation. There are other tasks, such as plot line generators, that depends on how you implement it. If you use, for example, deep learning or LLMs, it might be considered as one task on creative AI or generative AI, but if you use a symbolic approach, would never enter these classes. There's also games that include some creative part, and those would not enter in any of these, usually, traditionally, the way we talk about these areas. But these are also in computational creativity. So I think it's time to discuss creativity in LLMs. Taking these ideas from computational creativity, let's try to approach these ideas on LLMs. And how do you discuss creativity in LLMs? First of all, if you can, don't. run away. If someone asks you this, I always do. But this time I decided to try it. And so taking the first approach, can LLMs help us understand human creativity? I say yes. LLMs, first of all, we can talk about what we're doing right now. We're talking about creativity in LLMs, and it's just because LLMs bring attention to this topic. So this is one good thing about LLMs. It brings attention to the topic. Second one, it serves really well as a computational cognition model. So we can ask, is this the way we think? Really? Of course, probably not. That's the good answer. But it poses the question, is this what happens in our brain? And this is enough to be interesting, to help us understand human creativity. Lastly, it's really important to see how society interacts with AI. For example, there's this trend in social media to replicate AI flaws, such as extra limbs, extra fingers, or just funny faces. So it's kind of, people are getting inspired by the flaws in AI and bringing it to a loop. So AI is trained on human-generated content, and then people are taking that aesthetical vibe and creating content based on AI-generated content. So this interaction is really important because creativity is not just behavioral, it's also social. And this is a big, important part. So are LLMs creative machines? Well, this is the hard one. This is the hardest one. First of all, it's important to think of these two components. First is how people perceive creativity in LLMs. This is one thing. The second one is this actually being creative the way we are, right? And these are two separate things, and they need to be assessed in different ways. There's several ways to assess these kind of things. In computational creativity, everyone is trying to provide new ways to assess creativity. It can be metrics in the same way that machine learning did, for example. It can be architectural constraints. So we say, if we implement this, then it is creative. There's also been some proposals on this, through this approach for other topics such as artificial general intelligence or consciousness, for example. But there's a new approach that I've seen during the last year mostly, which is this indicator approach. So we propose some properties, and we check if the models actually meet these properties. And if they do, it doesn't mean that they are actually intelligent, conscious, or creative, but they are more likely to be. So it's about the likelihood. There's something that, for example, I'm going to provide you some examples on, for example, what is missing in an LLM, but what do LLMs get right when compared, for example, with guns? Refactoring. So LLMs can actually improve step by step on building something. This is very common in human creativity. We don't give birth to something, usually, just one way. We actually progressively reiterate and refine. And this is something that LLMs do slightly, in a different way than GANs don't. There's also something that is missing on LLMs, for example, or in the vanilla version of LLMs, they cannot restart. And that's a good indicator of how there's always the possibility for us to throw something away when we create. And that's a good, important part. And LLMs cannot do this. Well, maybe chain of thought, yeah. But there's one interesting thing that is, so my colleague Max Peppercorn, this year at the International Conference on Computational Creativity, he showed that this creative parameter, the temperature, actually did not correlate that well with the perceived creativity. When we tried to create some sentence. I think it was something about text generation. We generate different texts and we ask, which one do you think is more creative? And actually, the creative parameter do not correlate that well with how people perceive creativity. So there must be something that is missing here. So yeah, there are things missing. But can LLMs help humans be more creative? To that, I say, yeah, but why? Because just before ChatGPT was released in 2021, me and colleagues of mine, we decided to interview artists and ask them, what do you want from software? What do you want software to do for you? What do you need? And we collected a bunch of roles that people felt they would need from software. And well, it's interesting to see how many people described something so similar to what ChatGPT is, the roles that ChatGPT is playing nowadays. So it's really interesting to see before they knew what these were, they were describing it very similarly. There are things that are not very well aligned, but, well, you can also read it on the paper that we published. Another thing is that hallucinations are very fun to deal with if you know that they are false. So when you know that the hallucination is an hallucination, then you can just say, yes, let's use this. But if you don't know, if you think it's true, well, that can be really messy. And that's another thing that I think so when we develop these kind of tools to help creativity, we need to take care. We need to be optimistic but responsible. When I was doing this interview to artists, we noticed something. Musicians wanted to generate visual art based on their music. Visual artists wanted to generate music based on their visual arts. So they wanted to replace each other. And if you were developing something for musicians, then they would be developing visual arts, like visual generating software, without taking into account anything, any feedback from the people that were actually generating visual arts. So it's important not only to include your users when you're developing. This is the idea of human-centered design. You're not only developing for your users, but for humans, and you need to include all kinds of humans in your development process. And this is one of the main ideas of responsible optimism. We believe that actually software can help us be better, but we need to take care of the impacts, and we need to take a look at the impacts. So I want to give you the take I want you to take from this talk is that, yeah, LLMs can help us understand if we are responsible, optimistically responsible. LLMs can help us understand our own creativity and can boost our own creativity, but there's still things that are missing. And, well, this was a short presentation. If you want to know more about computational creativity and where to study this awesome area, just come meet me. I'll be around. Or just add me on LinkedIn. Yes. Thank you very much.